The Horus Heresy shattered the Imperium, and the legions Astartes were never the same. Some fell to chaos, others were broken up, scattered, or exiled. But every single one of them left a legacy, and all of them are still shaping the galaxy today. So with Primarchs returning left and right, it's time to ask, what happened to the original Space Marine legions after the Heresy, and where are they now? Following the Siege of Terra, the Dark Angels and their Primarch returned to their homeworld of Caliban to find it held against them by their own brothers. Already filled with grief, the First Legion was forced to fight their own legion mates led by Johnson's former best friend, Luther. The battle was titanic. Luther was possessed by the powers of chaos so he could match the Lion. In a final psychic attack, Luther mortally wounded the Primarch of the First and came to his senses just in time to see his old friend carried off by the mysterious Watchers in the Dark. The Chaos Gods were frustrated with yet another failure. They had wanted the Lion dead, not injured, and so they whipped up a sudden warp storm which scattered the traitors across space and time. Not all of these Marines would end up falling in with the forces of chaos, but they were renegades nonetheless and spent the next 10,000 years running from their angry brothers. After the betrayal on Caliban and the destruction of their homeworld, the Dark Angels were consumed with loss. They had lost their emperor, their home, their brotherhood, and their gene father. The civil war between loyalists and traitors within their own ranks created a deep sense of shame that would never fully fade. They began to call themselves the Unforgiven, a name passed down to every successor chapter that followed. These chapters formed a secret brotherhood, united by one goal: to hunt down the fallen. Only the most trusted leaders, the Inner Circle, were told the truth. Most of their own brothers had no idea about the civil war, no one being told the truth about the fallen until they reach the Inner Circle, and it was their top priority to hunt them down. At the first sign of a fallen, entire battle plans were thrown aside. Nothing mattered more than redemption. But that mission changed when Lionel Johnson returned. For just over 10,000 years, the Lion had been hidden deep in the remnants of the Dark Angels chapter fortress, recovering from his fight with Luther. Now, after his long sleep, he was different, older and wiser than the brash young monster slayer he had been. He still hunted the fallen, but not all were treated the same. Those who showed regret were given a second chance, forming a new force called the Risen, while those who couldn't be saved were put down without hesitation. Able to travel the galaxy through a mysterious mirror world that resembled the forests of Caliban, Johnson began to appear on battlefields across the Imperium Nihilus, learning about the current Imperium while saving as many people as he could. At first, the Lion believed he was the only loyal son left in the galaxy, but after saving Lord Commander Dante from the transformed Angron, he learned that Rabute Guilliman had also returned. He wasn't alone after all. It was around this time that the Dark Angels were finally reunited with their father, and while they were overjoyed to see him again, his acceptance of some of the fallen, now called the Risen, has been a point of friction to say the least. For their part, the Risen seem to have mostly been lied to by Luther, told that the Lion had abandoned them and that Johnson's forces were the real traitors. Obviously, that lie fell apart quickly, but the consequences lasted for over 10,000 years. So when their Primarch called, the Risen were more than ready to rejoin him. Despite this inner conflict, the Dark Angels are still one of the most well-equipped Marine forces in the galaxy, with some of the purest gene seed available, and along with the Ultramarines, have been the strongest shield of the Imperium from the Heresy right up to the present. Well, my request for information on what the Second Legion was doing during this time has been denied, or rather, we just received a printout of Malcador's frowning face. It's probably best to move on. No longer a legion in any real sense, after the Siege of Terra, the Emperor's children scattered across the stars, raiding Imperial worlds, not out of strategy, but for the sheer pleasure of it. In the wake of the Heresy, they fully devolved from a disciplined fighting force to a gang driven by the chase for their next high. Their Primarch Fulgrim had already embraced chaos by the end of the Heresy, transforming into a demon prince of Slaanesh and disappearing into the warp, leaving his legion to their own devices. With no clear leader, the Emperor's children fractured. The chaos of the Battle of Scalathrax, where the World Eaters broke into disordered bands of killers, only sped up the degradation of Fulgrim's sons. Once famed for their discipline and artistry, the defeat made them turn inward, attacking each other in madness and obsession, forming small warbands as well. Fabius Bile briefly stepped in to fill the vacuum, but the former chief apothecary saw the Legion as raw material for his horrific experiments. He even clashed with the Sons of Horus over the War Master's corpse, hoping to clone the fallen Primarch. The cost of that failed power play drained what was left of the Legion's strength, and the infighting only worsened with more and more Marines joining smaller warbands. Eventually, a handful of warband leaders, those with enough cunning to survive, formed the Phoenix Conclave. Led by Primus Eidolon, one of the Legion's original commanders, they tried to rebuild something resembling unity. Under his banner, the Emperor's children now raid once more, not for strategy, but for ecstasy. Their actions are often accompanied by unconfirmed sightings of Fulgrim himself, his monstrous form a reminder of what they lost and what they now serve. The Iron Warriors emerged from the Siege of Terra with nothing but contempt for the other legions, and themselves. By the time they had joined their fellow traitors on the fields of Terra, the Iron Warriors were surrounded by mutation and madness. Realizing that they were the only ones still trying to be soldiers, but stubbornly unwilling to rejoin the Emperor's forces, Perturabo withdrew before the final battle. A large group of the Iron Warriors made straight for the Eye of Terror, while the rest, including Perturabo himself, stayed behind to try and hold their old Iron Empire against the vengeful Loyalists. Considering that the Legion was forced to destroy their own homeworld of Olympia soon afterwards, this initial split was likely done in order to set up the new Iron Warriors home base in the Eye. But like we said earlier, the Iron Warriors are stubborn and maintained discipline more than any of their fellow traitors, discipline that was held together by the spite that kept them all going. Perturabo wasn't going to just be chased into the warp without proving that he and his sons were the greatest siege masters in the galaxy, which he did on Sebastus IV in the Iron Cage. This sprawling fortress complex was a killing ground of trenches, minefields, and bunkers designed to break Rogel Dorn and the Imperial Fists. For a month, Dorn's Legion was slaughtered by the thousands, their defeat prevented only by the timely arrival of the Ultramarines. It was a hollow victory since Dorn escaped with enough Marines to found several successor chapters, but it earned Perturabo the favor of the Chaos Gods, and he won his ascension to demonhood by sacrificing 400 Loyalists' gene seeds. From there, the Iron Warriors set up their new home on Medrengard inside the Eye of Terror, but all was not well. From 600 to 730 M34, the Legion descended into civil war, splitting into several warbands. There's some evidence that the pragmatic genius of Perturabo had orchestrated the whole thing to weed out weakness in his aging Legion, but whatever the case, once the infighting had stopped, the Iron Warriors again took to the Imperium to raid and despoil. From the endless meat grinder of the Siege of Vrax to bitter wars against Ultramar and the Cadian Gate, the Iron Warriors have remained one of the most active and dangerous traitor legions, including towards the other traitor legions. Unlike others, they rarely worship chaos in the traditional sense. To them, demons are tools, nothing more. Their obliterators and demon engines are weapons of necessity used with the same brutal precision as their artillery and siege tanks. Unlike many legions, the White Scars saw little reason to change after the Heresy. They accepted Guilliman's Codex Astartes, but kept their own traditions, with their successor chapters continuing to fight in the Primarch's spirit, favoring speed, sudden strikes, and lightning raids. But the Great Scouring brought tragedy. While clearing the Yesan sector just 70 years after the Siege of Terra ended, Jagatai Khan vanished into the Webway pursuing Eldar raiders, and he was never seen again. The White Scars have always been some of the most professional and stoic legions, and so while they have been holding out hope that their Primarch will one day return, they haven't let his absence set them back. They have continued to appoint Khans, Masters of the Hunt, and constantly patrol along the Imperium's borders, guarding systems near the Maelstrom and clashing constantly with pirates and Xenos. They have, of course, also taken part in some of the biggest conflicts of the past 10 millennia, like the Third War for Armageddon, the fall of Cadia, and the Octarius War, but their main focus has been the inglorious upkeep of the far edges of the Imperium's borders and hunting down some of the most dangerous enemies of humanity. And on that note, one feud that stands above all others, their war with the Red Corsairs. After the Corsairs captured and tortured their chapter master Jubal Khan, the White Scars swore to destroy Huron Blackheart's forces. No truces, no quarter, just endless pursuit until one of them is destroyed. The Space Wolves were born as the Emperor's executioners, a pack of hunters sent to bring his will to those who defied it. After the Siege of Terra, they basically kept that up, but no Primarch felt the Emperor's wounding more deeply than Leman Russ, who became a shadow of himself. Haunted by grief that he had not been on Terra to defend his father, Russ argued against any changes to the Emperor's design, most notably with Guilliman's Codex Astartes. He sided with Rogal Dorn, but eventually reached a compromise rather than risk another civil war. The Space Wolves would keep their own structures and attempt to create successor chapters, which is actually something Russ had liked the idea of, but their only attempt ended in failure when the Wolf brothers all succumbed to the major instabilities of the Space Wolf gene seed. Russ would stay with his sons until 211 M31, when at a great feast, he gathered the 13th Great Company and vanished into the Eye of Terror. Whether he was looking for vengeance, a way to heal the Emperor, or both, none can say. Before leaving, Russ swore to return at the Wolf Time, a prophecy of a final apocalyptic battle. In his absence, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, one of the oldest living Astartes, took his position as the first Great Wolf. Under new leadership, the Wolves have hunted traitors, searched for any sign of their Primarch, and have weathered some of the fiercest conflicts in the Imperium's history, including invasions of their homeworld by the vengeful Thousand Sons. And they haven't exactly been the Imperium's favorite Marines either. The Wolves have always been quick to defy authority, and their clash with the Inquisition over the Second War for Armageddon is legendary. When the Inquisition ordered the extermination of the surviving civilians, men, women, and children, as well as the remaining Militarum forces, the Wolves stood against them, refusing to let the people they had fought for and bled with to suffer such an honorless end. It wouldn't be the last time their independence caused friction with the Imperium either, but the authorities usually end up deciding that it's much better to have the Wolves on their side, and for their part, the Wolves just want to defend humanity and feel entirely justified in getting grumpy with Imperial leadership. Despite these conflicts, the Space Wolves are still counted among the Imperium's most loyal defenders, and thanks to the creation of the new Primaris Marines, they now have stable successor chapters for the first time in their history, which is, of course, just what the galaxy needs: more wolves. The Imperial Fists were the only legion to ever claim Terra itself as their homeworld, and their legendary stubbornness would cause them a lot of hardship after the Heresy ended. Rogal Dorn blamed himself for failing to protect the Emperor, and in the aftermath, that grief hardened into fury. Dorn launched a new crusade, a campaign of vengeance against the traitors, all while rejecting Rabute Guilliman's new Codex Astartes. This fight almost led to another civil war, but after some meditation, Dorn came to the belief that his failures had led him here, and he needed to embrace a new way of doing things if humanity was going to survive. However, he knew his sons were just as stubborn as he was, and so he needed an opportunity for the whole Legion to cleanse itself through pain, and that opportunity came when Perturabo set his trap. The infamous Iron Cage incident, which we went over earlier, saw Dorn's Legion broken on Perturabo's fortress world, suffering catastrophic losses. Dorn knew it was a trap, but the point was to suffer. For the Fists, the Iron Cage became a grim form of penance for failing to save the Emperor, and afterwards the Legion officially accepted the Codex Astartes. Despite their losses, the 7th Legion endured. Dorn oversaw the breaking of the Legion into the second founding chapters, the Black Templars, the Crimson Fists, and the Soul Drinkers. The Primarch himself would be lost in battle during the First Black Crusade, leaving behind only a fist, but before his mysterious disappearance, Dorn left one final contingency: the Last Wall Protocol. If Terra was ever threatened again, every successor chapter would reunite and fight as one. This plan was critical during the War of the Beast, when the combined Imperial Fists Legion saved the Imperium from annihilation at the hands of the greatest Orquois ever recorded. The price was steep, and by the war's end, the original Imperial Fists chapter was destroyed to the last man. Yet through their successors, the Fists were able to repopulate and now continue their legacy as one of the Imperium's mightiest defenders. The Night Lords abandoned the Imperium, but never gave themselves to the Dark Gods. They rejected chaos as strongly as they had rejected the Emperor. Fear was their entire purpose now, and in the aftermath of the Heresy, they became its purest expression. While other traitor legions retreated to the Eye of Terror, the Night Lords scattered into the void, embracing a raider mentality. They torched cities and executed planetary governors in front of their screaming populations. They didn't try to build empires or start cults like their fellow traders. Their only goal was to sow terror. Their Primarch, Conrad Kurz, had foreseen his own death for quite some time by this point, so when a Calidus assassin came for him, he gave the order to stand down. His death was justice, in his eyes, and before it happened, he named his Talon Master Zo-Sahal as the heir of the Legion. But the Night Lords are not a passive bunch. A warband led by Talos Valkyran, the so-called Soul Hunter, pursued the assassin across the stars alongside Sahal. Talos succeeded in killing her, but Sahal fled into the warp, taking the Legion's crown, the Corona Nox, with him to protect his claim to leadership. And with that, the chance to unify the Night Lords was lost for nearly 10,000 years. For a time, Talos became something more than a killer. His visions of the future, his defiance of the Dark Gods, and his refusal to abandon Kurz's ideals earned him mythic status amongst the 8th Legion's scattered remnants. His warband aboard the Echo of Damnation struck with purpose, not just hatred, and prophecy as ever caught up with them. Talos fell in battle as he always knew he would. Without him and without Sahal, the Legion collapsed into infighting. Over the next 10,000 years, the Night Lords followed other strong leaders as they slowly submitted to the corrupting nature of chaos. The Demon Prince Krieg Acerbus, for instance, leads what is currently the largest cohesive force of the Old Legion. And despite the return of Sahal at the end of the 41st millennium, many don't see him as worthy heir to the Night Haunter. But there is one source of hope, Decimus, prophet of the 8th Legion. He is the inheritor of Talos' gene seed and has his gift of prophecy. Whether he represents a last chance at unity or only another doomed crusade remains to be seen. The Blood Angels barely survived the Siege of Terra. With Sanguinius dead, the Legion fell into mourning. Raldoron, first captain and most trusted of the Primarch's sons, took command, but no amount of discipline could hold back the flaw that haunted their bloodline. The Black Rage, a sickness created by the psychic backlash from the death of their Primarch, began to consume more and more of the Legion. Marines would fall into madness, believing themselves to be Sanguinius in his final moments. Even the successor chapters couldn't escape its reach, and while some, like the Flesh Terrors and Angels in Carmine, learned to weaponize the flaw, others, like the Lamenters, were nearly wiped out by it. Still, the Sons of Sanguinius remained one of the Imperium's most active and revered fighting forces. Across tens of thousands of years of warfare, the Blood Angels and their descendants fought in nearly every major conflict, from the War of the Beast to the Wars for Armageddon and the 13th Black Crusade. Then came the devastation of Baal. The Blood Angels' homeworld was besieged by two enemies at once, a demonic incursion and a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan. Facing annihilation, they sent out a call to every successor chapter. The war was brutal, and worse still, it struck during the opening of the Great Rift. Baal was left stranded in the Dark Imperium, cut off from the light of Terra. But fate, for once, did not abandon them. As the Blood Angels stood on the brink, Rabute Guilliman arrived at the head of the Indomitus Crusade. Baal was saved, but at a terrible cost. The dead outnumbered the living, and worse, the new Primaris recruits eventually began showing signs of the Black Rage, just like their firstborn comrades. Their Primarch's fall at Eastman 5 was more than a loss. It was, to the Iron Hands, a failure. Their failure. They blamed Ferris's rage, his need to face Fulgrim directly, and their own inability to stop him. That guilt grew into the belief that emotion itself was a weakness. In the wake of the Dropsite massacre, the Iron Hands withdrew to their homeworld of Medusa, refusing to answer calls for aid while the galaxy burned. They re-emerged only near the end of the Heresy, driven not by duty, but by a cold resolve. They would never make the same mistake again. Over the next 10,000 years, the Iron Hands rewrote their identity. Flesh was failure, emotion was instability, weakness, whether physical, psychological, or strategic, was to be purged. They replaced damaged limbs with steel and guilt with logic. They severed themselves from centralized command, ensuring that no single person's failure could ever doom them again. Leadership passed to the Iron Council, a collective of senior tech marines and dreadnoughts who guided the chapter by consensus. Some whisper that the Mechanicum encouraged this change, slowly deepening their hold over the Iron Hands doctrine. In public, the two remain allies. In truth, It's a relationship of careful manipulation on both sides. Despite their cold nature, the Iron Hands became one of the Imperium's most efficient forces. From the Scouring to the War of the Beast, the Armageddon campaigns, and the 13th Black Crusade, they fought with ruthless precision, sacrificing allies, assets, and even civilians when the math demanded it. And yet, not all of them have given up on their origins. In recent years, leaders like Chapter Master Cardan Stronos have pushed to restore some spark of humanity to the chapter. As head of the Iron Council, he has advocated for the inclusion of captains, apothecaries, and members from other parts of the chapter in order to broaden the thinking of the council. The balance between logic and spirit, machine and man, remains a point of tension, but for the first time in millennia, there is debate about what it means to be the perfect warrior. It is with sound mind and absolutely entirely no threat of harm that I can report that there has never been an 11th Legion Astartes, and any talk about either that or a mysterious guarded cell in the palace basement will be seen as an attempt to spread heretical lies and dealt with swiftly. Okay, how's that? Good? Okay, perfect. Can I just get a moment to talk about why your Custodes armor is all black? Because it's really okay, and he's gone. Among the first legions to follow Horus, the World Eaters fought with savage fury throughout the Heresy. At the Siege of Terra, it was they who broke through the walls of the Imperial Palace, led by their Gene Father Angron, now a fully fledged demon prince, but their fury came at a cost. Angron was banished into the warp and the Legion splintered. Many World Eaters had already succumbed to the Butcher's nails, their minds eroded past reason. Some were placed in stasis, executed as threats, or forced into dreadnoughts. But resources were limited. The Legion's ships were badly damaged, and with Karn mortally wounded in the final stages of the siege, leadership collapsed. Officers like Gogor, once Angron's Terminator bodyguard, seized control of scattered elements, and the Legion crawled towards the Eye of Terror. But the final shattering came on Scalathrax. There, locked in brutal combat with the Emperor's children, the World Eaters began to falter. A deadly ice storm swept across the battlefield, and both sides pulled back to take shelter. But Karn, revived from his near death and lost to the nails, refused to retreat. Taking up a flamer, he torched his own brothers in their trenches, slaughtering anyone who refused to keep fighting. There would be no break, and the remaining World Eaters went berserk, killing friend and foe alike until the battle was over. From that moment forward, he was Karn the Betrayer. By the time the fires burned out, the World Eaters were no longer a legion. The survivors formed smaller warbands, fragments driven by bloodlust, bound only by their devotion to Khorne. For 10,000 years, they left no monuments and raised no strongholds. They fought for the joy of slaughter and the glory of the Blood God. And now, Angron has returned. The Demon Primarch leads his sons again, carving a trail of devastation across the galaxy. Systems fall in days, and planets are reduced to altars of bone and ash. Horus knew Guilliman's legion was the largest and most disciplined in the Imperium, so he made sure they couldn't reach the throne world in time, cutting them off with a huge Wordbearers and World Eaters force, scattering their fleets and trapping them in the eastern fringe. By the time the Ultramarines could fight their way back, the siege was over. In the chaos that followed, the Ultramarines became the Imperium's largest and most reliable fighting force. While the shattered remnants of other legions limped home, Guilliman rallied his sons and struck back. They took lost worlds, reinforced loyalist war zones, and filled the void left by broken chapters. Guilliman himself was named Lord Commander of the Imperium, leading the scouring with strategic precision, but he knew war alone wouldn't save humanity, so he wrote the Codex Astartes. The Codex divided the legions into smaller independent chapters to prevent another heresy, but it also laid down battle doctrine, command structure, and operational law. As we've mentioned, some Primarchs resisted at first, but in the end, all loyalists accepted it. Guilliman's reforms reshaped the Imperium, but he still had a mess to clean up. He fought two of his brothers in single combat. First came Alpharius, whose cryptic schemes threatened the unity Guilliman had fought to preserve. Guilliman broke from his newly written codex and surprised the traitors with a direct assault and struck his brother down in a brutal close-quarters duel, though, as we have come to expect, no one's sure if it was Alpharius at all. Then, at the Battle of Thessalia, Guilliman faced the demon his brother had become. Fulgrim carved through his honor guard and met Guilliman blade to blade, wounding him with a warp-tainted weapon beyond the Imperium's ability to heal. He was placed in stasis by his chapter, silent and unchanging, while the Imperium slid toward darkness. For 10,000 years, the Ultramarines have been the backbone of the Adeptus Astartes, present in nearly every major war of the era. From the War of the Beast to the Black Crusades, from Armageddon to Cadia, the Sons of Ultramar have served as the Imperium's single largest and most stable marine force. And then, Guilliman returned. Revived by Archmago's call and the Yaneri prophet Yvraine, the Primarch rose to a galaxy on the brink. With the Indomitus Crusade and the Primaris Space Marines, he saved the Imperium from collapse once again. Once among the most resilient of the legions, the Death Guard's fall to the Plague God only deepened that strength, infesting them with rot, disease, and an unnatural toughness. Their armor corroded and their bodies decayed, but did not die. After the defeat of Horus, Mortarion led his legion on a bitter campaign of destruction, carving a path towards the Eye of Terror. There, in the festering world now known as the Plague Planet, which they call Munificence, the Death Guard made their new home. Unlike the other traitor legions, the Death Guard didn't fracture in civil war. Their warbands spread across the stars, yes, but they remained loyal to Mortarion, unified in purpose. They existed to spread Nurgle's gifts, and that they did. During this time, one other leader rose to carry Nurgle's will, Typhus, the Herald of the Plague God. Once known as Callus Typhon, first captain of the Death Guard, Typhus commands the massive battleship Terminus Est, and leads his own crusade across the stars, seeding contagion worlds, raising zombie hordes, and spreading Nurgle's plagues wherever life still clings. For 10,000 years, the Death Guard have infected worlds, poisoned populations, and turned battlefields into plague zones. And when the galaxy began to break, Mortarion returned. During the Plague Wars, the Death Guard launched a full-scale invasion of Ultramar, bringing Guilliman's realm to its knees. Brother fought brother, Demon Primarch against living legend, until Guilliman banished Mortarion back into the warp. But the rot always returns. Magnus the Red had tried to warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery, and for that, the Wolves of Russ were sent to burn Prospero to ash. The Thousand Sons were nearly destroyed, their homeworld was annihilated, their loyalty was repaid with fire. In the final days of the Heresy, Magnus threw aside his doubts and gave himself fully to Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways. With the Siege of Terra already underway, he led what remained of his legion into damnation. Empowered by sorcery, the Thousand Sons became an arcane force without equal. Their cohesion and discipline endured far longer than most traitor legions, but the curse of mutation began to spread through their ranks, corrupting flesh, warping minds, and unraveling what little remained of their unity. To preserve the legion, Ahriman, former chief librarian, gathered a cabal and cast the rubric of Ahriman, a ritual spell of immense power. Those strong in sorcery were strengthened, while everyone else became dust, sealed inside their armor, trapped as rubric marines for all eternity. The spell saved the legion's identity, but at a terrible price. Magnus, horrified by what Ahriman had done, banished him from the planet of the sorcerers. Magnus has returned to the material realm more than once. He clashed with Guilliman in the wake of the Primarch's revival, and led an invasion of Fenris itself, seeking revenge for the burning of Prospero. But even with Tzeentch's tricks and 10,000 years of slow degradation, the Sons of Russ would not break. As a legion, the Thousand Sons are motivated by their next big breakthrough in arcane knowledge. Ahriman and his band have focused on reversing the rubric to save their lost brothers, while other bands focus on taking real space worlds that have some sort of ritual significance for whatever spell they are currently attempting. This makes their appearance seem random and disconnected from greater events, but we all know that Tzeentch always has his eye on the long game. When the War Master fell, the Sons of Horus were left broken, hated by their allies, hunted by the Imperium, and blamed for everything that went wrong at Terra. With Horus gone and their homeworld Chthonia destroyed by the Dark Angels, the survivors were forced into the Eye of Terror and regrouped on the demon world of Malium. There the cracks widened. Some still worshipped Horus as a god, others wanted nothing to do with gods ever again. They jumped from worshipping one chaos god to another in an effort to gain power, each time angering the demons and possessed Astartes in their ranks. The constant shifts in loyalty bled them of manpower, and then the Emperor's children made it worse. They stormed Malium, shattered the fortress, and stole Horus's body. What followed was the ultimate humiliation. Fabius Bile created a clone of Horus in an attempt to unify the traitors again, but the clone was destroyed by one of the War Master's own sons, Abaddon. and it was Abaddon who brought the Legion back from the edge. Once first captain of the Sons of Horus, Abaddon rejected the failures of the past. He found the scattered warbands and pulled them under one banner, whether they liked it or not. No more worshipping leaders, the weakness of Horus is what got them here. Under Abaddon, they became something new, the Black Legion. They repainted their armor black and gold, they swore no loyalty to any one chaos god, ensuring that all forces would be respected equally in order to avoid angering any one of them. They even took in warbands from other legions, ensuring fresh tactics and a larger force of Astartes at all times. And they would need those things because Abaddon had a very long-term plan to bring the Imperium to its knees. Over the next 10,000 years, the Black Legion struck again and again in massive Black Crusades, each one carving deeper into Imperial space, and in the 13th Black Crusade, they finally broke Cadia, and the galaxy burned once more. After the failure at Terra and the death of Horus, the Word-Bearers pulled back into the Eye of Terror. Their homeworld, Colchis, was destroyed by the Ultramarines during the cleansing actions of the Great Scouring, but unlike most of the other traitor legions, the 17th Legion stayed intact. Part of this is because of how devout the Word-Bearers are. They were the first legion to turn to chaos worship after all, but their cohesion is mostly down to the leadership of their Primarch. To his gene sons, Lorgar Aurelian was just as inspiring as the Emperor, and his ability to plan long-term was better than most of his brothers. Seeing how other legions fell apart due to loss or corruption of their Primarchs, Lorgar set up a new leadership structure on their new homeworld of Sicarius in the Eye of Terror, the Dark Council. The Council commands the Legion's hosts, warbands that range in size from a loyalist company to something larger than a chapter. Each host is led by a Dark Apostle, the Word-Bearer's version of a chaplain, and all follow the same goal, to spread the word of the Dark Gods and break the Imperium from within. Thanks to this structure, the Word-Bearers don't actually need their Primarch to be effective, even if they still worship him. This strong leadership meant that while other legions spent centuries turning on each other, the Word-Bearers focused on infiltration and corruption. They seeded cults, built temples, and turned entire worlds to chaos. It's a slow war, and one that's brought them into conflict with the Alpha Legion more than once. Both rely on secrecy, but the Word-Bearers believe open worship is the endgame, the Alpha Legion doesn't. Oh, and we almost forgot, Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard, has been hunting Lorgar and the other traitors this entire time. He has been a particularly horrifying threat to Lorgar, and so the Word-Bearer has been hiding from him while completing the rites to ascend to demonhood. With the formation of the Great Rift, however, the hiding has apparently stopped, as Lorgar, now a fully fledged demon prince, has been spotted with his legion preaching the word of chaos to a shattered and fearful Imperium. The Salamanders were in rough shape at the end of the Horus Heresy. Between the Dropsite Massacre and centuries of desperate holding actions during the Great Crusade, they were one of the smallest legions with barely enough Marines to support a modern chapter. Small but unbroken, they set out to do their part in the Imperium, pushing deep into traitor-held space and helping drive back the remnants of the War Master's forces. Their smaller numbers meant that they were often seen working with other legions, especially the Raven Guard and Iron Hands, who had been similarly mauled at Eastvan 5. Together, these legions would commit to various guerrilla actions against traitor forces like the Alpha Legion and Emperor's Children, who were easier to deal with using smaller concentrated forces. Now, the Salamanders had always been small thanks to their goals in combat, leading them to frequently take huge losses to protect civilian populations, so it's not really that surprising that they managed to keep themselves stable even after their massive losses in the Heresy or the Reforging, which is what the chapter refers to as their reorganization under the new Codex Astartes. But Vulcan was not the same. The Primarch had survived the Heresy thanks to being an immortal perpetual, but he had changed. I guess dying a lot and getting tortured into near insanity by the Night Haunter will do that to even a Primarch. We really do need to do a separate video on everything Vulcan went through because it was a lot. But after the Scouring, he fought beside his sons for a time, then vanished just like Russ did. He did return briefly during the War of the Beast about 1500 years afterwards, but that was temporary, and Vulcan went back into seclusion afterwards. The Salamanders have spent the next 10,000 years seeking the 9 artifacts of Vulcan, masterworked weapons and devices scattered across the galaxy, believing that when the last relic is found, their Primarch will return. In the meantime, they fight where they're needed most. They've served in some of the worst war zones in Imperial history, most famously during the 2nd and 3rd Armageddon campaigns, where they earned a reputation for protecting civilians even at the cost of strategic ground. For most of that time, they stood alone, thought to be the only chapter of Vulcan's gene line, with 1 or 2 theories surrounding chapters like the Storm Giants, but that changed with the Ultima founding. The arrival of the Primaris Marines brought new brothers, new successors, and for the first time in millennia, the Salamanders had kin to stand beside them. The Raven Guard were nearly destroyed at Eastvan 5 alongside the Salamanders and the Iron Hands. Trapped behind enemy lines with no way out, most of the Legion died in the opening blows of the Heresy. Corvus Corax led his sons through the fire and began to do what the Raven Guard does best: sabotage. Working with the remaining elements of the Salamanders, the Raven Guard began to strike at the traitors with their trademark guerrilla tactics. They committed themselves to softening up targets for other legions like the White Scars and the Space Wolves, eventually joining the Dark Angels to destroy the homeworld of the Death Guard. The Raven Guard had already been diminished greatly by the gene experiments completed earlier in the Horus Heresy. After Eastvan 5, with his legion severely depleted, Corax visited the Emperor to beg him for ideas on how to save the Imperium. The Emperor was really busy with his Webway project, but he managed to give Corax a small vision of his creation of the Primarchs, specifically the parts on how to make a superhuman warrior quickly. Corax had to find his father's laboratory deep inside an ancient labyrinth, but once he did, he was allowed to use his findings to attempt to rebuild his legion with faster, stronger, and better Marines. However, the Alpha Legion had been waiting for this and sabotaged the experiment, leaving with the knowledge and technology. The failures from this sabotage resulted in mutated monsters not too different from the Wolfen of the Space Wolves. Slowly but surely, these cursed Raven Guard were killed either in combat or by Corax himself, and the wounds from his loss ran deep. But the Legion's greatest wound was the loss of their Primarch. Not long after the Heresy, the Raven Lord disappeared into the Eye of Terror, declaring a personal hunt for Lorgar and the Wordbearers. For a time, nothing more was heard of him. Then, the rumors began. When the Emperor had made the Primarchs, he did so using power from the warp as well as advanced genetics, a fact that led many of them to becoming demon princes so easily. Within the warp, Corax became something else, a shadow beast, a silent executioner, hunting demons in the dark, not as a Primarch, but as a loyalist demon prince, and the Imperium has no idea what he's become. No one really knows what the Alpha Legion is doing, and at this point, we don't think some of them really know either. They fought for Horus during the Heresy for the most part, but after the War Master's fall, they didn't retreat to the Eye of Terror like the other traitor legions. Instead, they went underground and headed into the Galactic East, deeper into Imperial territory, following plans no one else understood. During the Scouring, they clashed with the Ultramarines on Escrador. Rabute Gilliman claimed to have killed Alfarius during that campaign, which was surprising because Rogel Doran said the same thing, that he had killed Alfarius but on Pluto years earlier. Maybe one of them was right, maybe neither were. Whatever the case, the Alpha Legion did not collapse, it just dispersed. Cells reappeared across the galaxy, hitting high-value targets, toppling cults, building others. They fight on both sides of wars, supporting chaos uprisings on one world, then destroying a demon incursion on the next. And to make matters more confusing, they rarely used forces of just Astartes. More often, it's mortal agents, networks, and cultists seeded from within a system over time. Like the Raven Guard, the Alpha Legion has been involved in almost every major engagement over the last 10,000 years in a support role, often following their own plans since it's never clear which side they're really fighting for. Regardless, this style of warfare makes the most of their limited Astartes numbers, since most cells only require 1 or 2 Marines to lead. But it also makes them extremely hard to stamp out, and the Inquisition has declared the Alpha Legion extinct no less than 3 times now, which is always immediately followed up by another very public Alpha Legion assault. This confusion even extends into the Legion itself. Some Alpha Legionnaires still believe they serve the Emperor, that by infiltrating chaos they are keeping it contained, cutting it out of the Imperium before it spreads. Others have fully embraced the Dark Powers, and some appear to be in a chaotic cycle of support and betrayal, double agents with no clear idea of who they actually work for beyond their Primarchs, if they even still exist. The time period just after the Horus Heresy until the 42nd millennium is the mythic past of the setting, and while it is a little light on details considering the sheer amount of time, it is also the whole context for how the bright promise of the Imperium became the horrible dystopian mess it is now. And that's not to say that there isn't plenty of interesting topics to look into during this time. We mentioned wanting to talk about poor Vulcan, but what about the Alpha Legion schemes or the Thousand Suns invasion of Fenris? Which story would you like to hear about? Let us know in the comments, and of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out on more lore.